That day, all female officers will be required to wear tiny miniskirts!
One of the biggest misconceptions about chess is the idea that the king piece, the most important piece in chess, is also the weakest. Compared to the rook and the queen pieces, the king piece is very limited in how it can only move at one space at a time, and how its capture means the end of the game. While true that the king piece starts off very weak, if a player chooses to believe in that misconception, they'll find themselves underestimating a piece that truly shines when chess reaches its endgame. For it's here that the king piece thrives, and when it can show to the players why it's earned its status as the most important piece in the game. Roy Mustang is a man who not only sees the value of such a piece, but understands its true purpose. Raised as an orphan, the young Roy Mustang had one simple dream: to serve his country and its people. He did so by enlisting in the military at a young age and becoming its youngest state alchemist of his generation. There he was shipped off to war, where his knowledge, leadership, and mastery of flame alchemy led him into becoming a hero to his country and a monster to himself. Fueled by nothing but guilt and anger towards the system that enabled the Ishvalan genocide to take place, Roy made a vow to reach his way to the top no matter what, where his dream of serving his country and people can truly be realized, and he can meaningfully atone for his crimes. But you probably already know that by now. Roy Mustang is one of the most popular characters in Fullmetal Alchemist, a series that's already one of the most popular and critically acclaimed animes of all time. I don't think I've ever seen any real criticism about Roy's character because, well, what can you hate about him? He's just a really cool guy with some amazing fights and moments. And it's funny, because if you're really familiar with the writing and structure of anime and manga, then you know that Roy Mustang isn't anything new. He's your typical rival character with his own goals and powers meant to contrast the protagonist. If you look at it clinically, his character is almost cliché. But then once you read or watch the series, you'll find that none of that matters, as Mustang is just so damn interesting and fun to watch. But what makes him so well beloved, and why is it that his story is so remembered even years after the series has concluded? Well, let's light the first spark. Alchemy is the linchpin of the entire story. It's what kicks off the plot and is the connective tissue to almost every character in Fullmetal Alchemist. From Edward and Alphonse's attempt at human transmutation leading to their bodies being taken as punishment for playing God, to Scar's quest for vengeance against alchemy itself. So, it's interesting that Roy Mustang has a strictly professional relationship to the craft. While Mustang greatly respects alchemy, he views it as nothing more than a tool to help serve his country. This contrasts the main characters, the Elric brothers, who view their status in the military as nothing more than a means to an end regarding their quest to regain their bodies. It's this contrast that I feel is the first example of Arakawa showing just how different Mustang's world is compared to the Elrics. Ed and Al are boys of science. They were instilled the laws of alchemy at a young age, and they spend most of their free time researching and investigating the works of other famed alchemists to learn all their secrets of what being an alchemist is to them. Mustang is a man raised for the military, to serve his country, to serve the people. That is what being an alchemist is to him. But this resolve is tested when he's enlisted in the extermination of the Ishvalans. Not only is Mustang physically tested in this war, but also mentally, as his purpose in this conflict is nothing more than a living weapon for the military aimed directly at people who happen to commit the horrible crime of defending themselves from a country who only cared in seeing every single one of them dead. It's during this conflict that Roy is given a piece of advice from the most unlikely sources. Kimberly, another state alchemist and about the only man who seems to be enjoying himself during this war, scolds Riza Hawkeye and by extension Mustang over their anguish about having to kill, reminding them that killing even innocent people is the life of someone who decides to wear the uniform, and advising that if they wish to respect the people they kill, that they ought to remember every single one of them. It's such a significant scene for both Riza and Roy, despite being the only interactions they have with the man, that it forms the foundation for their conviction for staying in the military after the war is over. Speaking of, the ending of the Ishval War is where the tenets of Roy Mustang's character begin to take shape. He's racked with guilt. The trauma of having to kill so many people, along with knowing that he was the one responsible for their death, forms the motivation as to why Roy decides to not quit the military after the war is over. At the same time, he's faced with the gratitude of his fellow soldiers. Mustang reciprocates it, and it's here that we see where Mustang's utter devotion to keeping his troops safe comes from. The sight of their gratitude reminds Roy why he chose to wear the uniform and become an alchemist in the first place: to serve his country and man. Lastly, Mustang takes one long look at the man up top, the one responsible for all of this. Fear King Bradley, standing atop of everyone. If Mustang wants to make a difference, to allow the murders he's committed as part of this bloody war to have purpose, he has to make his way to the top of Amestris' military and become its new Führer. From there, the crimes he's committed can be exposed for what they were, and even if the punishment is death, he can die with a clear conscience above his head. Guilt, vigilance, and ambition. These are the core tenets that combine to make Roy Mustang, and it's shown multiple times throughout the series. From compromising an elaborate plan to ensure that his subordinates are safe, to his conversation with the Elrics when they're all at their lowest about not giving up their dreams, it adds up into Mustang being far more complex and interesting than what his initial impression of the cool fire alchemist with a quirky group of subordinates would have you believe. Speaking of Mustang's group, it would be remiss of me if I did not talk about the group of people Roy handpicked to be his squad. Each member of the group contributes something important to the overall goal of Mustang's ascent to the top of the military brass. What I really like is that Arakawa did her homework when it came to knowledge about chess and gave each member of Mustang's team an appropriate chess motif. Usually chess motifs never go beyond pawns and kings, but Mustang's pawn piece, Cane Fury, is anything but expendable, as Fury's radio communications and excellent coordination is vital to the group's endeavors. Vato Falman is the group's bishop. A walking database of information, Falman is pivotal to the group not just for his knowledge allowing the heroes to figure out the National Transmutation Circle, but also for his stationing at Briggs later in the series, allowing for communications to open between Mustang and General Olivier Armstrong, who does not have the highest opinion on the Flame Alchemist. Gene Havoc is the group's knight. Not the brightest member of the team, but a hard worker and an excellent shot. When those things get taken away from him, he still manages to contribute in a big way by providing additional guns and firearms to Mustang during his coup. A fantastic and smartly written metaphor for how the Night Piece can still be an effective unit during the endgame when at a distance. Heyman's Breda is Mustang's rook, physically one of the strongest members of the team, a great shot, and beneath all that, a tactical genius. It's no wonder why Mustang trusts him with Ed's illegal border crossing. Last, and most certainly not least, is Riza Hawkeye, Mustang's queen. As Mustang's right-hand woman and closest confidant, Hawkeye is the most invaluable piece of Mustang's team and the person he trusts the most. This loyalty is paid off in dividends, as Riza is an absolute badass on the field and fiercely loyal to the Colonel as he is to her. This leaves Roy as the king piece, and one thing I love about Fullmetal Alchemist is that it really shows what being the king piece really means. Mustang is both powerful and non-powerful at the same time. The other members of the team can be replaced, as much as he doesn't want to, but if he's captured, then his dream and everyone else's ends. This combines into making such a memorable cast of what is essentially side characters, but their importance and contributions to the story not only shows Mustang's ability to recognize talent, but also another very important, very crucial aspect of a leader, the ability to delegate. Roy technically can do all these jobs that I outlined by himself. He's smart, a brilliant tactician, and has no trouble with defending himself, unless it's a rainy day, but he chooses to have these people as part of his inner circle because he knows that you can't change an entire country all by yourself. It's an example of just how smart Mustang is and how much he's willing to bring about change in his country. The Flame Alchemist can't just snap his fingers and make a new military on his own, so it's important that he make as many allies as he can. And these allies go beyond just his team, but I'll touch upon that a little bit later. I mentioned Mustang's intelligence a second ago, and beyond his expertise with alchemy and his effective leadership, Roy's intelligence is perhaps his greatest asset. Like all good generals, Mustang is a master of obfuscation. If you were in an officer stationed with Mustang, you would assume all the Flame Alchemist does is take calls and arrange dates with one of his many mistresses. Roy's deception as a lecherous womanizer is so good that he even annoys people who are in on the act. Hell, it even continues to trick some of the good guys like Olivier Armstrong. In truth, he's either talking to his squad through codenames or gathering information and rumors from the brothel where the owner happens to be his foster parent. This makes Roy not only book smart in alchemy and politics, but also street smart in gathering information and gossip. A deadly combination of intelligence if there ever was one. But none of Mustang's intellect would matter if he didn't use it, and the plans he concocts throughout the series are some of my favorite scenes to watch unfold. From the radio communications takeover to the big coup d'etat at the end of the series, it's just so damn satisfying to watch all that time and build-up pay off in such a grand and epic way. What I love though, and what I think makes Roy different than your usual masterminds like Light Yagami or Aizen, is that his plans are not perfect. Take the murder of Maria Ross for example. Roy knows that the higher-ups in the military want him to stop pursuing the murderer of his best friend because it's going to lead him to the homunculus. So they lay a patsy in Maria Ross, figuring that if they pin the blame on her and Roy kills her, then his vengeance will be satiated and he can continue being a loyal pawn to the military. Not only does Mustang know all about this, but he devises his own plan in faking Ross's death by creating a fake body out of meat and bones, using his flame alchemy to burn it beyond recognition, allowing Ross, who is an innocent victim in all of this, a safe way out of the country, and securing a copy of her teeth so that any further examination of the body can still be identified as her. It's an ingenious plan and a phenomenal example of Mustang being 2 steps ahead of the military who thinks they can rein him in, while unbeknownst to them, Roy is busy moving his pieces so that he's the one who comes out as the real winner. And like I said earlier, his plan isn't perfect. Dr. Knox, the coroner, figures out the body is not Maria Ross's pretty immediately and only lets it go because he owes Roy a favor. This mixture of guile and luck makes Roy's plans not only satisfying to watch unfold, but also thrilling because there's always the chance that he can completely fuck up. Which is kind of the opposite to how all his fights go. Looking back, it's interesting that if you really think about it, Mustang doesn't have a whole lot of fights in this series. He spends most of it recovering from his injuries during his fight with the homunculus. In fact, I would go so far as to say Mustang doesn't even have any real fights. He has massacres. Almost every fight Mustang has ends in the exact same way, with Roy standing tall and his enemies burnt beyond recognition. Arakawa does not pussy out on the lethality of flame alchemy. When Roy snaps his fingers, it's not a tiny stream of flames coming down. It's a fucking explosion of hellfire raining down upon his enemies. Roy Mustang isn't a walking flamethrower, he's a living goddamn rocket launcher. The flames he creates are just an aftermath of the explosions he causes from just a snap of his fingers. On the surface, this might sound boring after a while. A guy whose power is just snapping his fingers? But in a series where practically everyone fights in some unique and interesting way, it's ironically refreshing to see someone whose main strategy is just attack, attack, and attack. This, however, leads me into perhaps the most controversial fight in the series, Roy vs. Envy. This fight isn't controversial in how it plays out, but more in how it ends. Roy's fight against Envy is a complete stomp in Roy's favor, effortlessly toying with them and making their pain last as long as possible. For anyone who's seen the series, you would know that this is a long time coming for Envy. But right as Mustang is about to lay the killing blow, he's stopped by everyone. Ed, Riza, even Scar, all beg for him to not be the one who kills the homunculus. A lot of people don't like the fact that Roy wasn't allowed to get his revenge over Hughes' death, and had to be talked down out of killing someone who absolutely deserves it. Instead, Envy just kills themselves without much fanfare. I can absolutely understand the frustrations fans have over this, but I think it's worth going over the context and why everyone was so worried about Roy. It would be one thing if Roy just killed Envy straight up. Given Roy's skills, it would have taken under a minute and nobody would bat an eye, as Mustang is a professional and Envy was still a threat that needed to be permanently taken care of at some point. But what Mustang was doing was torture. He wasn't just fighting them, he was making them suffer for as long as possible. Nobody is denying that Envy is undeserving of it, but Roy was not acting as himself. The ambitious, vigilant soldier who wanted to change his country for the better was being consumed by the rage of a man who only wanted revenge. Compare Roy's fight with Lust, where Mustang's annihilation of the homunculus isn't done out of malice but of self-defense. The difference between Roy killing Lust and Roy almost killing Envy was that Roy needed to kill Lust to protect his allies, while Roy just wanted to kill Envy because they killed his best friend. What should have been a moment of catharsis for Mustang ended up becoming a moment of weakness for the Flame Alchemist. Speaking of weakness, I think it's now time to discuss what really makes Roy so damn fascinating as a character, when he's at his worst. It would be one thing to talk about Mustang and only bring up all his badass moments and achievements, but it's far more interesting to see the character at his lowest. You would think his best friend Magus Hughes' death would be a downer for him, and while yes, he was heartbroken over it and his death carries with Roy throughout the series, it's not a real moment of weakness. Mustang is out and about investigating the murder on literally the same day of Hughes' funeral. Roy is affected by his best friend's death, but he doesn't let it stand in the way of his dream. In fact, it provides further motivation for him to continue his ambition towards the top. No, the lowest point of Roy Mustang in the story is when his unit is disbanded and every member of his team has been reassigned to different stations around the country. As Roy so eloquently puts it,
"My pawn, my bishop, my rook, my knight, and, worst of all, they've even taken my queen."
Out of units and out of options, it seems like Mustang has been checkmated, but once again everyone is underestimating Roy here. What nobody in the military, not even King Bradley, realized was that Roy created his team to delegate, not because he was unfit to do any of their work, and so, Roy Mustang adapts. Using his connections with his mistresses to gather information and relay communication to his allies like his bishop and pawns would, synthesizing said information to carry out his plan of action like how his rook would, and finally, being the Flame Alchemist, ensuring that his reputation will allow him to do whatever the fuck he wants without anybody stopping him, just like how his knight and queen would allow him to. He establishes connections with the Briggs Brigade and begins moving the pieces needed to get Lieutenant General Grumman involved in his cause, a man shrewder and even more ruthless than Mustang is. This, along with his additional allies being the Elric brothers and fellow state alchemist Armstrong, all culminates in his attempted coup d'etat in Central, where it's revealed that he has his own private militia, made up of soldiers that have sworn loyalty to him during the Ishvalan War. And to top all of that off, every member of Mustang's former unit contributes to helping Roy with his coup. Yeah, Central and Bradley thought they could get rid of all of Mustang's pieces, and Mustang countered by revealing he has an entire board's worth of units to back him up. And need I remind you that Mustang sees himself as the king piece. The military assumed that the king would be worthless without his units, but they, like any foolish chess player who underestimates the piece, made a big mistake. The king piece gets stronger the less units are around. As Wilhelm Steinitz once put it, the king is a fighting piece. Use it! Lastly, I want to talk about one more encounter that the Flame Alchemist faced that truly tests his conviction, and that's Roy Mustang's trip to the other side. Roy's visit to the gate and subsequent meeting with the Truth is a very brief but important encounter to not just to the story, but to Mustang's character. Mustang is revealed to be one of the 5 sacrifices needed for the homunculus' plan on the promised day. Now this is where I feel Arakawa's multiple spinning plates method to storytelling begins to falter a little bit here. You see, the 4 candidates are the Elrics, Hohenheim, and Izumi, 4 brilliant alchemists who all thought they could perform human transmutation and attempt to play God, with each of their attempts backfiring and all 4 of them being forced to pay for their hubris. All 4 are connected to each other directly, and it makes sense for them to be the candidates chosen by Father for his plan to absorb God using their gates. And then there's Mustang. By the time Roy gets turned into a sacrifice, it's so late in the series that they even acknowledge how rushed it is for him to become one, having him forced to perform a human transmutation and dragging him to the gate so that he can lose his sight, being seen by everyone as a last-minute resort. Yeah, this is again another very controversial topic. Having Roy be forced to pay for the toll and losing his ability to see, even though he was literally dragged and bounded by the homunculus into performing a human transmutation, is unfair both in universe and to the fans. However, I do think it is important to note what exactly Roy loses here. Mustang loses his sight, not his eyes. His eyes are perfectly fine, it's just the ability for them to see is gone. Why would the truth be so specific? If the truth wanted a body part for the toll, he'll take it. It doesn't matter if it's a man, woman, or child. He's established to be brutally unfair to anyone who crosses their path, so why the oddly specific sense of sight? I think at this point even Truth has caught on that this wasn't a natural journey. The user has to pay a toll, and Truth decided that just the sight and not the eyeballs themselves would be enough for them. Besides, it's not like Mustang needs to learn any lessons from this. After regrouping with Riza, he immediately takes advantage of the fact that he now has gate alchemy and adapts by using his lieutenant's sights to direct his eyes. By the end of the series, Roy even gets a Philosopher's Stone to use as a payment to get his eyesight, and he still has access to his gate alchemy. Now this is where I'm about to get a little controversial here, but I think Roy losing his sight might have been a blessing in disguise for him. By losing his sight, he had the opportunity to let go of his dream, to let go of all the pain and suffering he caused to the Ishvalans because, well, he paid the price. He was now blind. He could no longer avert his eyes from death because there's nothing left for him to avert. This was Roy Mustang's final temptation, but he refuses, even before given the opportunity to get his eyesight back. And one thing I love in that scene is that even without his eyesight, which would have meant an instant discharge for Mustang, he still resolved himself to change and improve his country even without his sight. Roy was still ready to continue his dream even with such a setback, which I think speaks volumes to his determination. So yeah, even though Ed won according to the truth, Roy managed to come out of this whole ordeal as the strongest character in the series. And checkmate. By now you've hopefully understood why Mustang is such an interesting character. His backstory, relationship with his team, and just his sheer determination are all part of what makes him so engaging to watch. Roy doesn't have to be your favorite character, but I think he's the best example of why Fullmetal Alchemist works so well as a story. Because it's not just about Ed and Al's journey to get their bodies back. It's also about their father's centuries-long journey of redemption, about Ling and Mei's journey to find immortality not just for themselves but for their clan back in Jing, about Scar's road to self-discovery and God. And of course, it's also about Roy Mustang's path to Fear and what he'll do to reach it, all for the purpose of ensuring that those died by his hands died with a purpose, and to ensure that future generations would not have to bloody their hands like he did. All of these roads are so masterfully converged by Arakawa's storytelling that you sometimes forget you're even reading the same manga, but when it all comes together, you feel like that it was earned, and I think this is the real secret to why Fullmetal Alchemist is so well loved. You can easily find a journey here that resonates with you. It just so happens to be that the journey I resonated the most was Roy's. Now before I end this, I do want to briefly mention Mustang in the 2003 anime. I'm kind of mixed on his portrayal here. Some parts of it I like, some I don't, and some that makes me mad that Brotherhood didn't adapt nearly as well. Maybe one day I'll do a video on the 2003 series, but for now, let me end this on one final note. Roy Mustang's journey is still not over. By the end of the series, he's now a general, but still not a fear yet. Fittingly that the second to last shot we see of Mustang is Kimbley's advice of not averting his eyes from death, to see straight ahead of the pain and to never forget it, showing that even after all of this, the homunculus, the promised day, and even losing his sight, Roy Mustang is still focused on what matters to him the most, to serve his country and its people. A long and difficult road awaits Mustang, but for the Flame Alchemist, he wouldn't have it any other way. After all, if you want to have a full metal heart, you gotta be able to cast it through fire.